say, yeah, hey, give me some cool emails, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I'll just add it in.
So, and then this week, actually we'll talk about next week. Next week, we're actually going to do a personal statement workshop type thing that Dr. Fritzler will be running. And I don't know if he's going to be here if he wanted to tell you a little bit about it, but basically he has had some communication with different medical schools and talked about what they like to see and reviewed what personal essays or personal statements from accepted students versus the other ones, and he'll kind of go over that and contrast those. So I think that'll be really important, especially if you're applying this year. And then this week, we're going to have the panel here for everybody that's sitting up here has been accepted, so they've kind of gone into that iconic status that we will idolize a little bit. Wish we were all in their shoes. And so we'll have them tell us a little bit about their experience and be able to do a question and answer thing. But I think the whole thing, at least from my point of view, what we want to do here is that sometimes it feels like, at least from my personal experience, that you get so caught up in the day-to-day and trying to get assignments done, and trying to make sure that you're getting a good education and not just being able to answer questions on a test. And you're trying to do this stuff that it's sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. So I think it's good to be able to have stuff like this. Good to be able to see where they're at. It's good to be able to actually see physicians that have, you know, lived their whole life and see where they're at. If you haven't taken the life and medicine class, which there's a couple of us in here that are in that, but that's really good too because they're doing that. You know, it's taught by Dr. Mosinger and Dr. Goff and Dr. Fritzler. So they're, like, you know, this week he basically was talking about how many hours a week he works. And, you know, going over divorce statistics for physicians, which is actually kind of a pleasant thing. You know, it was probably a lot less than you would think. Anyway, I just think it's good that you can see the whole spectrum of being like, we're here now. The next stage will hopefully be here. And then in a couple weeks, I'll be having a physician that actually went to Weber State, went to the University of Utah, and now just graduated residency, so he's been in practice now for a little bit. So again, what I'm just saying is it's good to be able to see the whole spectrum and be able to give us a little bit of help to why we're doing this for the day-to-day. So anyway, when I call your name, raise your hand. Jason Davis. In fact, I don't. Jason, you're not going to participate.
I'll say it. I won't quite say as much because you guys are probably tired here.
Okay.
Anyway, so
sounds good. Taylor Frost.
What else? Maybe just have them say their names because not everyone's on the list and some people
Oh,
aren't
okay.
here. So.
All right. Sounds good. Well, Chris, do you want to start?
So I'm Chris Hill.
Maybe just say what school you're planning on going to so far.
Yeah.
So, and it's MD or DO. Maybe that would be good, yeah.
Chris Hill. Right now I'm planning on going to Penn State in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and it's an MD.
So Justin Anderson, I'm deciding right now probably between Creighton and Indiana University, so MD.
Britton Lowell, I got accepted to Lee Collins DO school.
What was your first name?
Bradenton. Britton.
Britt. Oh.
Hey. Well, so I'm Mike Gertson, and I'm also going to Lee Collins Bradenton. So I knew there was one other person.
I'm Matt Fulmer. I'm going to Midwestern in Arizona. Deal. Yeah.
Does your car have air conditioning?
My cars are on their last leg. I'm really surprised if I get down there. I'm Sterling Haas, and I will be going to the University of Miami. It's an MD school.
I'm Dominic, and I'm going to still in Arizona. It's DO.
And then Jason Davis, I'm planning on Indiana University. It's an MD school. And I think Sterling should mention his is an MD and PH program. In 4 years, he gets to do an MD and an MPH. Because I'm pretty jealous, that's why I'm saying so.
that is really cool, Sterling. You're already accepted to that, or?
Yeah.
By the way, Sterling, is there additional things that you have to do? I mean, you have to specify that's what you're looking for. Does everybody that goes there do that? Or
On your application, you do have to indicate that you're interested in it. And you can apply to both programs, and you're accepted to them separately. So, and if you're accepted to both of them, you have a deadline that you have to choose which one you want to go to.
Cool.
But I just applied to the dual degree program, because if I was going to go down
Cool. And you know, as far as how we were to do this, one other thing I just wanted to talk about there, I saw an email that I think was from Dr. Fritzler for, it was a research program for medical school in Ohio. Anybody see that? I thought that was really cool. I actually spent some time around Ohio State University, which, as we talked about last week, Ohio State's a pretty competitive school. What was it, 35 MCAT, 38? Something like that. So this is about an hour and a half drive from, I was just looking into it a little bit, it's about an hour and a half drive from Ohio State. So if you're from any of those schools, that would be something you really want to look into. And I noticed that they said that if you do that, you are essentially guaranteed an interview with that school. So that might be something that you guys want to look into. So anyway, Jason, as far as that, do we want to just start out with questions and answers? Does everybody want to give a little bit? How do we want to do that?
Yeah, just throw out some questions and answers maybe. If you want to have questions, then we'll drive the discussion a little bit.
Okay.
Just ask.
So yeah, I guess with that, we'll just turn it over questions and answers. And I guess if it doesn't have any questions, then you guys have something that you want to say, let you guys run with it. So. What kind of research is participated in how?
Maybe we'll just like have like, because everyone's gonna like answer once, or everyone could answer, we'll take forever. We'll just have like 2 people answer, or if someone really wants to answer, they could like raise their hand. Maybe we'll do it that way. We don't have like 10 people saying all the research they did or whatever. Does that sound good? Okay. So we'll do Chris and Justin on that, and do 2 by 2 maybe.
So my freshman semester, actually, I never taken a biology course before in high school or anything. I really chemistry did. So I hopped into a human bio course, just like 10-10 with Dr. Clark, and Amanda Trong was his research assistant and was my SI. So I did the class and ended up really liking human bio and thought, you know, bio is pretty cool. I can't believe I didn't do this before, and maybe I'll look into it a little bit more. And Amanda made the comment, she says, well, if you want to get in, you should get into research with a professor. So I just approached Dr. Clark, like 2 weeks into the semester, and said, hey, Amanda's doing research with you. Is there a place that I could hop in? And he said, yeah. He's like, wait until next semester and we'll bring it in. So that semester ended. I did well in the class, and I went in Dr. Clark that next semester. So I did 3.5 years of research in the DNA lab, genetics lab in the bottom of the lecture over here, and it's been very fun.
So for my research, I got into the MLS department, and we have a mandatory research class. And so I was put in a group with 3 other students, and we developed our own project, submitted it to OUR and got funded, and then went and actually got to present it at La Crosse, Wisconsin. So we got to go and do it that way. But I think that's a really cool option, because you can get the funding from OUR no matter what program you're in, whether you have a class with it or not. You just need a professor to mentor you. And so I think that's a really good way to go as well, if you just want to. And we spent about a year on it. You can spend more time on it if you want. But
I'll say as well, I've helped 2 other kids get into research with different professors in the zoology department, basically. But a big thing that is helpful that other professors have told me as I've done research, you know, you get close with a lot of the professors in the department. Their biggest complaint is that students expect professors to kind of say, I'm looking for a research assistant, so like, put in applications. That they look for students who do well. Obviously, they want to know who you are. So if you have a class with them, then approach them and say, I'm looking for research. I know that all the professors at the university are required to do research. So can I help you out? Or is there something I can help you with? Or is there a place where I can come in and start learning in your lab? I know with Dr. Myers and Dr. Clark and Dr. Chung, those 3, that's like their biggest complaint is that students kind of sit back. They want to be more proactive.
How much time a week would you say you did it over the 3.5 years? Would you like average it out, say?
It's different.
8 hours a week? Or?
For applications, I think I said it was, when I did applications last, I think I only did 5 hours a week. But over the 3.5 years, that equated to like 1,800 hours of research. And I mean, it varied. Like some weeks I would be in for 5 hours, maybe if it was a test week or a finals week or whatever. And then other weeks during the summer, I might be in for 38 or 40 or whatever I had spare time, or if I was getting up for a conference, it just changes. And professors usually don't say, you have to be in here, here's your schedule. They usually say, you know, whenever you come in, be in. They usually give you deadlines, say, but by April, you better have something to present at this conference, otherwise you're gonna look good with this.
which 1,800 hours is huge, right? So, you know, you don't have 1,800 hours.
I think at the year, the average is 24 hours and 25.
If you guys ever like want to interject or something, like it's not my deal.
I'd just make a point real quick too. So the Butte is 24, but there's some schools that are really research oriented, like the Mayo Clinic average is much higher than that. So, you know, it depends on where you're wanting to apply as well. Look now at where you're trying to go and see what their averages or their high end, because if you're hitting their high end, then it's a lot better for you than hitting their average, right? So.
What is average at Mayo, you know?
You're gonna make me remember almost a year ago. I'm thinking it was around 200, so I mean, he still would have been great, but,
Just barely cutting the deadline.
yeah, but I mean, if you're hitting 24 hours and you're applying there, you're probably not gonna get in, so.
Who's next?
We'll just like the next question.
Sure, yeah.
I thought we were going down the same way.
We're doing two.
Yeah, just so we'd all answer research the entire time.
Unless you had something.
I had something I
Yeah,
wanted
no.
to say about research.
Yeah, no, yeah. So like at least two of them answer, but like everybody doesn't have to take turns, they don't want to use one.
Sterling and I did our research together, and we kind of went the hard way about doing stuff. We had our own idea, and we wanted to do it on our own, and so we had to go through so many committees and get grants and everything. If you're going to do research, really, you need to go to a professor and make sure that you have someone on your side, because just as students, it's not going to happen. They're going to throw so many walls your way. So make sure that you have someone that you can go to as a professor, and make sure that you're close to them. Go do early morning sports with professors. Go do anything that you can to get close to them. SIing is really great, so that you can have that relationship with the professor.
I'll say this real quick as well. With all the hours I did for 3.5 years, I've never presented a poster. I've never presented at any conference. I've never had any showing of my research at all. I've switched 3 different research projects just because the professor said, yeah, listen, you've been working on this for 1.5 years. I think the dead end. We're just going to cut it. I'll put you on something else.
Wow.
And so it's not all about the results either. If you get up in a research project and, 6 months later you don't end up with what the results you want or whatever, you don't present, it's not the end of the world. It was still very impressive, the university I interviewed at, that I applied it in some cases I switched that, I turned that on and said, I had to deal with that. I had to deal with my research going nowhere for 3.5 years and me just being kind of dead in the water. But it was a good chance to, not care about the results as much as the work that you do to get there. So you can turn it and you make it positive.
I have a question for you. So did you ever did you ever publish something or finish your research, or would you just say you were like more a research volunteer?
No, so I never published or did anything. I'm presenting my first poster at the symposium this year, and I'm going to NCR this year for the first time in 4 years. So. But I've already done. I told the university that when I interviewed with them, but I didn't know I was going to do that until December, so it wasn't a big deal.
So I'll just add, like on the flip side though, like for me, like I spent just the summer doing research at a medical school. I contacted a physician at the medical school and heard that he'd let undergrads do research with him, and asked him if I would be able to do that with him. And I got the opportunity, and I actually got a paper published within the 4 weeks I was there. So my approach was like, if I do research, I want it to be like research that's published, like in a good in a good journal, and so I can have my name on something, so it makes me stick out. And so I think there's different ways you can go about doing it. Like Chris, he got an interview at a school that I've been like waitlisted on, and he's actually been accepted to it. And there was stuff about him they obviously liked more than they liked about me. Not like saying we're comparing to who's better, but every school has different ways to look at it. And I think that's definitely one thing that made Chris stick out, is because he had many years, of that research and that background. Where me, it was just like a summer thing. And I even think when I did the year, he's like, how long was that again? And he's like, oh, okay. And he's like writing notes, and I was like, oh, great. I should have been there like 3 or 4 years. That's the way they're looking at me. But that was more of my style. I didn't want to spend my undergrad all the time doing research, with classes. I wanted to like do it like nonstop for the summer and then like be done with it. And that was what I did. So you can, no matter how you go about doing it, because everyone here did it differently, I would just say, plan on doing it like as soon as possible. Get something set up. Otherwise, you're going to be one of those guys bugging a mentor or like a professor last minute to do research to get on your application, which is not going to look good at all. So.
And make sure that it's something you enjoy. because you're gonna keep doing research in medical school, it's not gonna end. This is something that's gonna continue all through your career. I would just add that, like, medical school, they're just as varied as people are, so kind of what everyone's been saying, and I hate to beat the dead horse, but just do something that you want to do. Make sure it's more, like, you don't want to do research just so it's on your application. You want to do research so that when you have an interview question about it, you can talk about it and say exactly what it was you learned about it and what you decided that your position is on research. Because some positions are going to go into research-heavy fields of medicine, some are not. They're just going to go in and go to clinical practice. It depends on where you go. Just like I said, like each medical school is going to be different. I know Austin Bolton, the president of the pre-Solomon group, the DO group last year, got into a medical school. He had absolutely no research experience at all when he got into medical school, but he got into a school that didn't really emphasize research a lot. So it just depends on what you want to do with your career in medicine.
What tricks would you suggest for balancing out the time, because you have to keep the GPA high, you have to study for MCAT, you have to work, you have to get all your extracurriculars in, so how would you suggest juggling that?
It's a good question, because a year ago, I started a new job, so they had me training full-time. I was taking about 17 credit hours. I was shadowing a physician for 40 hours, that all in the same semester, plus doing the research project. I was finishing up one that was also in the MLS program, so I was finishing up one from the MLS program and kind of jumped in on an organic chemistry one. And it was a really hectic semester. And I think the best way I did is I got a calendar, and I had to schedule out everything that I was doing. I literally had it down to I needed some travel time to get here, it was down to the minute. And I've never had to do that before until that semester. But once I did that, that helped me to be able to kind of protect that time I needed to keep my grades up to help prepare for the MCAT. And you gotta kind of find, there's only so much you can do, so you gotta kind of find where you can give and take a little bit. That's what I found.
Just to add to his, when I originally planned out my 4-year, ended up being a 5-year college degree, my advisor helped me, no, this is when you're going to be studying for the MCAT, this is when you're going to be interviewing, and so he helped me plan my classes accordingly. And so kind of, when you're planning out your semesters and stuff, keep that in mind, oh, if I'm going to be doing all this stuff, this next year I probably should, take, my gen ed classes. In fact, last semester I finished music, world history, and what else? Some other gen ed class that was really easy compared to OChem, and I was doing it during my interview time, so it was really convenient. Where I think I heard some other guys having taken OChem while they're gone every other week for an interview, and I just imagine that would be terrible. So anticipate when you're going to be doing these things. If you're going to be doing research, don't take as many credit hours, etc.
My question is more for Justin. But how are you going to decide between the two med schools then?
So, well, there's a lot of things that play into it. So the reason I haven't completely decided, Indiana is my first choice, but they do what's called, or they have a bunch of satellite campuses, as Jason would probably comment. And there are certain places that do that, and Creighton kind of does that as well, but you have an option. And so certain medical schools, especially if they have bigger classes, I don't know if Penn State's the same way, but there are different locations that you can be stationed at. So I'm putting in for a lottery to get Indianapolis, and that's the campus that I want. That's where a lot of the research occurs. But if I don't get that campus, then I would be going to Notre Dame or somewhere like that, where it doesn't have a very medically strong environment. So they'll have 30 or 40 students there, and there's not as much research going on. And so for me, it comes down to the decision will be do I get into Indianapolis, and that would be my first choice. If not, then I might consider Creighton as an alternative. Another thing that can really play a difference is financial cost. So I was also accepted to UCF, but and the tuition might be a little bit less, but if you compare the cost of living in Nebraska to Florida, it's a little bit cheaper in Omaha.
A little bit.
So
I'm just going to bring the cheapest place in the nation this year.
So I mean, there's a lot of things that you can put into it, and so I'm trying to weigh out all the differences. And but for me, the biggest thing is I would like to be at more of an academic center rather than a satellite campus. And so right now, if I get into Indianapolis, I'll probably go there. But I think a lot of us have multiple acceptances, and so you just kind of have to find what's your best fit, what feels right, and what fits your needs the best, especially with what you want to go into. If you want to go into family medicine, then AT Still, I read an article in, I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine, and it ranked AT Still as one of the top medical schools in the country based on criteria that what are they doing to fit the country's needs. And according to this article, AT Still was at the top of the list. And so it really depends on what you're leaning towards. If you want to do family medicine, I think AT Still is one of the top in the country. If you want to go into a surgical specialty, then maybe you want to lean to a different school or Hopkins or things like that. There's different schools. And so you just kind of have to find where you fit and what you feel you like best.
I have one.
Oh, sorry, just gonna say, sometimes, also you have to realize that a lot of the different medical schools like people with family and a lot of them don't. So if you're married, that's another way to choose. I know that Sterling's, I think you're gonna be only one of two that are married in your class. Yeah, in the whole school. Whereas at mine, there's not only a lot of married people and a lot of families, but also a very big LDS community, which I know LDS. So, I mean, those are all just personal factors.
How do you know? Do they like publish or do they put that on their stuff as far as like how many singles and how many?
I got an email of the person that interviewed me, one of the student interviewers, and I've just been kind of asking about any information.
Huh.
And I asked at my interview, at Miami specifically, and they said they had no outreach for spouses, and there was only one other person who had a wife and a kid.
At least you guys can hang out.
Penn State asked for the same interview, and Penn State doesn't have a lot of, Penn State doesn't have a lot of married spouses, but they do have spouse groups that get together while you're at medical school. The spouses can get together and have whatever different activities for the spouses to do, or get to know you, dinners and stuff like that, where it's just the spouses are inviting the medical students to make sure the medical students have that night off to watch the kids while your spouse goes out. Bonds with spouse and stuff like that, so that was really cool.
So when your wife calls and you be like, she's like, honey, when are you coming home? You're like, doesn't the spouse night have something going tonight?
Another way you can look at that too is, for example, my med school is not really keen on spouses and children.
Those Florida med schools.
I know, right?
Those darn Florida med schools. Anyway, one of the ways that I found out afterwards that you can kind of look at that is based on their cost of attendance. So some med schools will give you more if you have dependents. Like my med school gives me the exact same amount as they give a single student. So, you know, I have to get a 3-bedroom apartment by Florida law, which costs me $1,600 a month, and they're only giving me $1,000 a month. You know what I mean? So things like that are things you can look at prior to applying, and that I wish I would have known. The other place is Student Doctor Net is excellent at that, and so a lot of times they'll
Where are
talk
you
about
going
that.
again, Michael?
Lecon Bradenton.
Same as Britain, right?
Yeah.
So now that you guys are at this point, what would you identify, looking back at some of the strengths of your application and weaknesses, and what would, you know, if you could do, oh, if I would have done that different?
Oh, I didn't have any weaknesses.
Some advice for us who have not reached this point.
Yeah. Go ahead, man.
Make sure that you schedule and know the rules of the GPA. There is an advisor here, I'm not going to name names or anything, but they gave me bad advice, and it actually hurt my GPA quite a bit. And so make sure that you know and that you're proactive with what the rules are for GPA, retaking classes, dropping classes, all that kind of stuff, and make sure that you are in control of your own future. I guess is the advice.
I would say the biggest thing for me was I didn't look into the schools I wanted to go to soon enough and really get the down and dirty of them. You know, I started probably fall of my application there, looking into them. I really wish I would have started from the very beginning, from the very start. Got onto MSAR, got onto the different DO, and looked to see what they were after. Because like we've already mentioned, some schools are really research heavy. Some schools are gonna like this class and that class. And you know, I have people talk to me frequently, and they're like, "Well, should I be taking calculus?" Well, what med schools do you want to apply to? Because some are gonna require it and some are not. And so that limited me on some of the med schools I wanted to apply to, is I didn't have calculus in college, I had it only in high school, and the schools that I wanted to apply to required calculus as a mandatory thing. So I'd be looking now at what your application is right now for the schools you're looking at going to, because then you have a charted path, right? But if you're just going blind and going, well, I hope when I get to my application year that what I have matches up with what the schools want, it's not gonna work out. So that would be my biggest encouragement, and I know you're a little closer, but, I mean, it's never too late to try and start, right? And keep in mind that if there's a school you wanna go to, you can always schedule that class later on, after your application. They look at what you're going to be taking.
You found places like on the internet or anything that publish like what extracurriculars each school are looking for, like research, for example, like what schools really like research and which ones could care less? Have you found places where they have that information?
I don't think that there's any comprehensive list that will list exactly what's required, because extracurriculars are really broad. They're really broad, and different schools have different things. My one advice for this would be prepare yourself for the University of Utah, and you'll have like everything covered.
But just to add to that though, if you go in the MSAR, it says the percent of students that had research, and it says, 78% of students that had service, and it's like 48%, you're like, holy cow, less than half of their matriculated students this year, like, had service, like, that'll give you a pretty good idea. It won't tell you how much research they did, it'll tell you how much service they did, but it'll tell you, out of all the students that matriculated that year, which means that are attending, that's what they did. So the MSAR is a great resource. Play with that, you're gonna find out all kinds of fun stuff.
The other place you can look is, I looked and went to their actual website, and so their mission statement is gonna tell you what they're really about, but also, some med schools, even though their mission statement really didn't emphasize that they wanted this, throughout the rest of the website, they're talking about research and how they do research here, or how they do a lot of community outreach here, etc. And so if they're finding it important on their website, it should be important to you if you're going there. And it's not just, can I fill this checkbox, but is that really the type of med school you want to go to? Are you really interested in research? If you're not, then that's probably not the med school you want to go to, right? Because you don't want to spend 4 years having to do research with them when you really don't want to be doing that. You just want to be learning about family practice, say, right? So that's the other thing, is don't do it just so you have that checkbox, but do it to see if that's really the med school you want to go to.
MSAR will also have how much money that school spent on research, so that's another way to know. And it will also have what specialties are prevalent at that high school, what ones they send students to. So be in control of your own career, basically. Don't let others tell you exactly like step for step. Doubt everything and make sure that you kind of go over everything and make sure that's what you want to do and that's where you want to go, because you're going to be doing the work, not that.
And the pre-med program has a free MSAR account that you can access. Talk to Susan in the pre-med office. It costs money to access, and it's a yearly subscription or whatever, but they have one available. So, and it changes every year too. So just to let you know, that's something you guys can access.
When he says that it costs money, we get that
Not
for free.
us, yes.
That it costs money, that
Oh,
the school's
sorry.
paid for, it doesn't cost you money to go in there and use it. But it would cost you money if you didn't.
It's worth the investment though, I paid for it.
I paid for it.
Yeah, I paid for it as well.
It's only like $20 and it tells you everything you need to know about every school, their requirements, their class-wise and things like that, so it is a good resource.
And it's cool because you can, I didn't do this because I used yours, but
You can also use your friends. Which is,
you can star the schools that you want to go to, and you can put little notes in there and save that stuff for later, so it can be an ongoing, continuous thing.
And you can search for ranges of like GPA and MCAT scores, and it'll show you what schools kind of line up with what your numbers are. And numbers aren't everything, but it kind of gives you an idea.
out-of-state acceptance rates, stuff like that.
But that's only for MP schools, is there a resource for?
DOs, I don't think so.
They have a PDF.
There's only 30 DO schools, so they have a book that has all that information for the DO, so it's not good.
It's not as
good,
comprehensive,
but you can kind of take a look and.
Yeah.
So I have a question as far as, when you're talking about numbers, Sterling. When you're talking to Dr. Trask before Dr. Fritzler came, or when you're talking to Dr. Fritzler, they're saying, hey, these are schools that we recommend. Did you guys apply to schools outside of their recommendations?
Oh, I didn't get any recommendations from anyone. I found all my own schools and applied to them. And I really think that's probably the best way to go, because again, with all, like everything that everyone's been talking about, how you research the schools, going to the websites and things like that, I mean, that helps you figure out that information, but it also is gonna help you a lot when you go into interview, because you really know what the school's about. You're not kind of sitting there in an interview going, tell me about your school. You can really discuss with the interviewer about what it is you like about the school from what you read, what questions you have. But, no, I found all my own schools, and I got that list as well of like what schools have accepted Weber State, and you can take that into account because if we're all being honest, we're coming from a school that's not well known outside of Utah, and it's open enrollment. Yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say, no, we'll go to Utah.
So, yeah, not even Utah. So, it's good to look at that and use that in your consideration for things, but I mean, I don't know, have we ever had anybody go to Indiana before this year? Or?
Yeah, no, and so that's the thing is I think you should do a little bit of both. Like I think if I did what Sterling did, I would have felt super overwhelmed and super stressed. Like, oh my goodness, I have no idea if these schools will even consider me. But Remy, on the other hand, I like every school that Trask recommended I applied to. I applied to every single one of them because that's just my style. Like I'm not applying again next year, so I applied to like, you know, a ton of schools. But because Sterling did his research, he got accepted to this MDP, MPH program. That's totally awesome. I'm super jealous. He totally deserves that because he did his research work on it. But if you know, now you guys know about this program because you got accepted. But I think there's other schools out there that, you know, that would be willing to take Weber students, but they haven't applied yet. So I think you should pick like from both areas.
So, just along those same lines, when Sterling was saying there's medical schools are just like people, they have a ton of variance. In looking at a couple of schools I've seen where they actually list on the website, say these are traditional schools that we've accepted students from, and like some of them were really high-name schools, and I'm like, well, so does that mean that regardless of numbers, that it's not even worth applying there? So I guess my question is, how big of a factor does that play based off of Weber State students have been there, or we kind of only like dealing with these 10 to 15 supply schools? Do you know what I mean?
I definitely, and a lot of it depends on what your goals are. I mean, you really have to take an honest look at yourself as an applicant and consider where am I competitive. Because I think a lot of people get into the problem where they have a decent MCAT and a good GPA, but maybe don't see that honest evaluation of where they are in the application process. And so by talking to your advisors, I think they do, for the most part, give you a pretty honest look at what they think of you. And so they can only compare your numbers and things like that. But it usually is a good representation. It's not always true, there's always exceptions. But when you go and talk to your advisor, they can say, okay, with your GPA and your MCAT, this is where people have gotten in. And you can definitely apply to other schools, but there's just not that history. And a lot of the schools that I've interviewed at or been accepted with, or accepted to, are schools that had Weber students there, or students that I had found out that they had interviewed there. And so using those resources, I think, is really helpful. Of course, it's not always true because Sterling was able to do it, but I do think it's good to use those resources and definitely not take them as the gospel or ultimate truth, but it's definitely a good guideline to give you an idea of where you're going to be competitive.
If I can add to that as well. Sorry, just real quick, I think to answer your question a little differently as well, and I'm not disagreeing in any way, is that there's some schools that are going to be very, very nose in the air, like Harvard, you know, not to throw out names, but they're not going to accept a Weber State student, let's be honest.
Unless you score a 40 or above.
Flat out honest, even if you scored a 40 or above, they're probably not going to look at you. I mean, they might, but they're probably not going to. But with that being said, I think too often we sell ourselves a little bit short because we're an open enrollment. That's what the MCAT is for, is the grade equalizer. And the med schools, most med schools recognize that. So for the majority of med schools, you're going to be competitive based on your GPA is going to take a hit on some med schools. Some med schools automatically drop you 3 points or 0.3 points in GPA just because you come from a state school. But if you look at your MCAT and your GPA, taking that into account, most schools you're going to be competitive at if your numbers are competitive. it's gonna be those few exceptions to the rule that are gonna be the ones that aren't gonna even look at you, if that makes sense. So, I would do your research, obviously, because it is money out the door. Secondaries cost an arm and a leg, and primaries aren't cheap either, so.
Pretty much everyone gives a secondary, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they're necessarily interested.
Yeah, everyone's gonna send you a secondary because they want your 150, 200, whatever bucks.
But some schools, if they give you a secondary, it automatically means an interview, and West Virginia University is one of those schools. So is Indiana, but like Indiana, you have to have in-state ties, so that's why you need to really research your schools. For the most part, I mean, sometimes they have exceptions, like, I think there was a guy from Utah State sitting next to me, we were interviewing, and he's like, you have to have ties to this school to like apply here? I was like, well, obviously not, because you're here. I was actually rejected at Indiana before I wrote him a letter, like, stating my ties to the school, and then they reactivated my application, which doesn't happen often. But that's because during the screening process, they just looked at my MCAT GPA and like, oh, you know, he's out of state, reject him, but then I wrote him, they put me in a different pile. So, and I should have wrote that letter earlier, I guess I should have clarified too. I procrastinated because there wasn't a deadline, but, so anyway, lots of research just to throw that in there, so.
Did they tell you on your secondaries whether or not that guarantees an interview?
Those are the only two schools that I know of, and that's because the two that I applied to.
They did, Indiana told us that if we got an interview, or if we got a secondary, it's, an interview would be coming after you.
Yeah,
But that's
none
not
of the schools that I applied to, so.
It's not common.
It's not very common.
And there's some schools that are a little bit different too. It doesn't guarantee you an interview, but they're not gonna do it unless they're interested in you. Like the Mayo doesn't ask for a secondary until they've looked at your application and say, yeah, we're actually interested in this applicant. So it's a whittling down. It depends on the school.
Well, I just heard you mention the resource a couple times, MSTAR. How can we access that?
So you can go online, like the amc.org, and you can purchase it yourself. It's called the Medical School Admissions Requirements Service or whatever. Yeah, just Google it, or like I said, if you want access for free, just talk to Susan in the pre-med office. They have a computer in there you can use it to access.
Okay. I had a question. What were, I guess, some of your approaches to studying for the MCAT? Did most of you do like an actual paid course, like a prep course, or did you just study yourself?
Yeah, well, so who has an answer? Yeah, just go down.
I did the Altius course, that was pretty good. They have the, at least when I did, they have the extra tutor, so you do class time and then you have a one-on-one tutor session, so I thought that was beneficial, but it is kind of expensive.
Maybe raise your hand if you paid for a prep course, maybe that'll help you, tell you. And how many were grateful that they did it? Keep your hand up. Okay.
How many did? I'm trying to see down the line.
How many did?
How many didn't?
Did not. I
Did anyone do like exam crackers or sort
How
of?
many did exam crackers?
I
Raise your
used
hand.
it with a big course.
Exam crackers, anybody?
I used it,
Yeah. Anyone use a different resource that we haven't talked about?
I mean, Kaplan.
There's I'm getting a lot of emails lately, and a lot of other pre-med advisors at other schools are, it's called Dr. Welling's MCAT prep. I was gonna look at it before I sent an email out, but a lot of the other pre-med advisors at other schools
Dr. Welling.
are really talking highly about it. Personally, I don't know nothing about it, because I haven't looked at it, but when I do, I'll send it. We do different packages, it's all online, packages, I did look at price, anywhere from $100 to $500.
Which is way cheaper than the Kaplan or all.
But it is cheaper, if you need a cheaper version. But
There's also
they're all
the-
talking very highly about it.
The AAMC gives out their own stuff too that's a lot cheaper, so you can pay for the AAMC stuff directly, and they have a little booklet that gives a mini synopsis. I don't know that it's the best resource, but it definitely is something that you can look at if you're worried about spending a lot of money. I think that's the best resources for tests. I don't know if their booklet, it's basically just additional questions, but you can buy resources straight from the AAMC and they write the test, so that's a good resource.
Are there objective statistics of like which program usually does the best?
Depends on which
So the only one that releases their scores is Altius. The other ones don't, and I honestly don't know why. They could be doing better. I really don't know why. So the only one that has objective scores and they have a separate company compile their scores is Altius. But my encouragement for any prep course is know where you're at, and we all want to save money, but let's be honest here, if you're getting a 22 on your MCAT and waiting another year, is it worth that $2,000 or $3,000 or whatever you want to spend on the prep course? Well, absolutely. So it depends on where are you at. Honestly, sit down and figure out, do I really know this stuff well enough? And then determine how you want to go about studying for it. Because if you're one of those people that can study on your own and you really know the material super duper well, yeah, you might get off great studying on your own. But if you're someone who maybe struggled with your prereq classes, or it's been a while, or whatever, then maybe you want to take a prep course. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is don't shy away from, oh, it costs a lot of money. It's worth it. Let's look at doctor salaries, right? $180,000 a year. If you're having to wait one more year, if it costs you $2,000 to take that, you cost yourself $180,000 the other way if you didn't take that prep course. Does that make sense? So, I mean, to me, the math makes perfect sense. But it really is where you're at, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, and I would find students who've taken the courses and talk to them specifically, because they're gonna be the best resources for what they thought of their course.
Yeah, because at this school, like Altius has its own program, Kaplan has its own program, so talk to the students who actually took it here. It's going to be variable throughout the nation, I'm sure, but like, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, how can we accurately assess what our MCAT score would be when we take it?
They have practice tests all the time. Yeah.
Kaplan
I think
has free ones, you can kind of know the weekend score.
Susan sends out emails about
AMC has
dates.
a free one too.
Yeah, there's a free, emcat.com has a free, practice test 3 is completely free, go on.
Got a free one, you can buy our packet,
Yeah, you can buy the packet.
there are 2 left.
But if you're looking at buying a course,
You know, buy course packet.
then
CDX.
that's included, so you might want to wait until you assess where you're at to purchase that, because Kaplan includes it, Altius includes it, so.
I guess a better question would be, what about for those taking the MCAT in 2015? Did this change?
Yeah, that's a good
Those
question.
count from P1 to
I would still do,
They're gonna do every free one.
yeah, they're gonna have new stuff as it gets closer. I still do practice tests now.
Yeah,
The stuff you see now is still gonna be on there.
and it's not gonna be, I mean, it's gonna be different, but if you're struggling now, it's not like anyone's gonna come out and you're gonna all of a sudden do great.
Yeah.
You're doing great now. You're not likely to be in a horrible position when it comes out. Like, the test is gonna change, but you're still gonna be where you're at, so,
Yeah, and the AMC is publishing new ones as well,
yeah.
so.
How much time before you actually take the MCAT would you recommend getting into like a program or really hitting it hard on your own?
Start studying now.
No,
I was like, I did personal study on the course, and I knew going in that I was gonna have to put a lot of time into it, and so I was planning on taking the MCAT in May, and I started studying in January. And my study schedule in January is literally half an hour a day through January, an hour a day through February, and then in March, I'd start putting in 2 or 3 hours a week, and just kind of build up until that study schedule. And I'll be honest, I was horrible. I was horrible for self-studying. I didn't keep on track of my schedule much. So I really started hitting it hard in like end of March, early April, a month before. And that was probably to date one of my biggest regrets about last year. Is if I could like time machine it back, I'd be like, no, like I really have to put in at least an hour today. Because, I mean, you just cannot get enough time.
and I think the AMC puts out that they want you to study at least, or they recommend it to be successful, at least 300 hours worth of study. And so, I think whether you put that in right away, I'd recommend at least 300 hours within the 6 months leading up to the test, but, and maybe even within 4 months leading up to the test. But the more you can study for it, the better off you'll be. And like you said, you'll never regret overstudying and doing well. So you're definitely going to regret if you understudied and didn't do so well. So.
I was gonna say, if you're in the classes now, start studying now. That's my recommendation. Get a good set of review books. It's the same way when you're in med school, you're gonna start studying for the boards the second you walk into that door. So get a good review book and start studying now, and then assess yourself when you get closer to a program, whether you wanna take it. Kaplan, those of you who took Kaplan, I don't know if they offer anything in the fall, did they?
No,
Online,
they,
at least, right?
they do online or they do at the
Okay.
University of Utah, but they don't, their class starts in June.
Okay.
Even,
And
even
then-
if they do say that they have something in the fall, I had a in-person class for Kaplan, and then they canceled it because they didn't have enough people, and I ended up taking an online course, which was not really conducive to my learning.
And then Altius starts in the fall and will go continuously through the spring. So, again, it depends on what you're looking for. But starting studying for the MCAT yesterday.
Yeah, there's not one size fits all, like, what's gonna work for me didn't work for Britton, like, I mean, it's gonna be different for everybody. But just thanks for running out of time, like, if anyone has any last questions, be sure to raise your hand now, but I wanted to end with, if that's okay with you guys, what I want, but, like I said, what you wish you would have known, like, if you would go back different, like, kind of what Chris was on, like, you know, you wish you would have done, so something that you wish you would have known, having gone through the entire process, that would have helped you a ton, like, the one piece of advice that you could leave everybody with. And then maybe we'll end with that, just because I think that's a big deal. I mean, I think each of us learned a lot, but there's probably one thing that you guys can probably say that made a big difference.
And Jason, do you mind if I ask one question
Yeah.
before that? And this is not meant to get too personal, so if you don't want to answer, you definitely don't have to, but I'm just curious of what it's, if you're interested in answering it, how many schools you apply to, and or how much it costs to apply to the whole application process.
Well, I think Dr. Fritzler did a cast, radio cast with Dr. Chan, the admissions guy with the University of Utah, and you said what it was the least and the most students applied to was one school.
Yeah, on average, over the last 5 years or so, it's about 18 schools.
You know,
But granted, it ranges from 1 to 30-something
yeah.
sometimes.
So I applied to 28, so that was my thing. But I qualified for the FAP, the Fee Assistance Program, which waived $100 for each of those schools. So that's already like $2,200 plus the initial application fee, which is like what, $200? I don't know. I didn't pay it. So what was it like? It was like $100. So I saved over $3,000 on those schools. That's why I applied to so many. And they go off your parents' income on that. But and also with that, like, you can get free MCAT prep stuff, and the MSAR is free with that program too. And so definitely look into that program. It's called the FAP. It's also on the AAMC website.
Yep, do keep in mind for that, it does not matter if you've been on your own and married for 10 years now, they're still going to take your parents' income.
Yeah, I've been married 6 years and I didn't qualify because of my parents. So,
Yeah.
So
that's
Why didn't you make less?
I've got a question for those who are married with families. How are you guys going to adjust to your living families? How are they adjusting?
no idea.
I was gonna say, to be determined.
Because I have a husband and kids, so I would have
That's a
to.
good question. This resource here, I didn't talk about it, but this is a great resource for everybody, I think, for the future. It's called studentdoctor.net. And any kind of questions you guys have about getting accepted to medical school or prepping for the MCAT or anything, there's people that have asked these questions on these forum discussions. I think Sterling's